What are the most common mistakes that you can make as a CEO as you scale from zero to the first £15 million or $20 million or even beyond? Today I speak with Peter Busby, who is the founder of a professional services company called Grayce, which he scaled to exactly that level in under 7 years and building around 240 people along the way. And Peter really shares in a very clear way his insights on building a successful business at each stage of the process. And in a no-nonsense way tells you what works and what to look out for, what the risks are. And as well looks at the mindset you need as an entrepreneur. So this is a great kind of business 101 with a lot of hard-won expertise and insights from Peter. So enjoy this conversation with Peter Busby. Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. I'm Richard Metcalf, founder of X Quadrant, and my mission is to help the world's top CEOs and entrepreneurs shift from incremental to exponential progress and create a huge positive impact on our world. Now, that requires you to reinvent yourself and transform your business. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. Hi, Peter, and welcome to the show. So what I know about you, Peter, is that you have you founded a professional services company called Grayce at zero revenues. You grew it over about 7 years to a business with about 240 people and about £15 million, whatever that is in dollars, $20 million or whatever in revenues. And so you've really been through all of those phases of really getting a successful business off the ground. And I know now you're in more of an a non-executive capacity, perhaps in that business. So I think it'll be interesting today just to kind of look back. And now I think you've been out of the business a few years, just to kind of look back with the benefit of hindsight and the benefit of perhaps a bit of distance and look at like what were those key phases as you built the business. And what were some of the things that where you got it wrong? One of some things that you got right. And so kind of use this as a way of really, sharing perhaps those different phases from zero to 15 million, 20 million, whatever beyond. What is like the playbook for a founder? So where should we start? Should we start at inception? Like why did you create this business? What did you see and what was important in those early years?
So I suppose just to augment what you just said. So it wasn't my first business. I'd had a management consultancy business previously that I'd set up with some colleagues in the late 90s. And we'd sold that business on in the sort of about 2007, 2008. And that had been an interesting journey, probably where, I learned a huge amount. It was the first time I'd ever run a business or been involved in a smaller business. So, it's fair to say that, I made a huge amount of mistakes and while we achieved success, probably made it harder for ourselves than we needed to. So after a bit of a break and some non-exec roles, in the mid sort of 2010-11 sort of period, I was sort of eager to sort of, I suppose, capitalize on that learning and perhaps do a better job of creating a successful business and applying the lessons that had been learned. And as you say, a business comes in a number of phases, and you've got to have the right mindset to kick off with. Any founder of a business has got to have the right mindset, and you've got to think big. You've got to have an appetite for risk. You've got to be prepared to do what's necessary. And I probably proved to myself that I could do that in the first business. But I think the second time around, I was keen to sort of create something that was more differentiated, had a clearer market opportunity, rather than something that, in a consultancy business, very often it's much harder to create that differentiation because everybody thinks they're doing a great job for their clients. So that creating that differentiation, something that had a large addressable market, a product that had limited competition, a potentially significant customer base. So with that background, I evaluated a number of ideas, and took some external input, And eventually, inspired actually by someone who I hired to sort of provide some of that input, I alighted upon the model that we eventually called Grayce, but was essentially creating a population of talent, a graduate, high quality graduate pool that could be deployed into large corporates to help them reduce their bill for change and transformation, but also to perhaps give them a talent pipeline 18 months, 2 years down the road that would solve some of the problems that were around the change and transformation market at that time, where there was an aging workforce, graduate schemes, where there were any, had been cancelled through the big recession of the 2008. So we identified, and created a concept, I suppose, that felt exciting and perhaps novel. And there were one or two other players in the space, but very few, and certainly not in the specific niche of change and transformation that we were focused on.
Yeah, got it. So what I'm hearing, so first of all, thank you for giving us the extra background that, this was not your first rodeo, right? You've done this before. So we're able to get the experiences of what worked and didn't work, perhaps the first time round, as well as the second time. But I'm really interested is, you said, I want to create a differentiated offer, and you managed to do it within the realm of professional services, right? Which again, the first feeling often is it's going to be, a little bit Me Too, another consulting company just said. But you identified actually that it was in how you built talent, right? That was like going to be, as I understand it, that was your kind of secret sauce, was we're going to build a machine to take fresh graduates and turn them into useful human beings, or words to that effect.
I mean, the background to that actually was that I was went into Anderson Consulting in the sort of mid-90s as an experienced hire. Not that experienced, but someone with 2 or 3 years experience. And you go onto a project and 60, 70% of the team would almost have landed as graduates. Now, for clients, that wasn't necessarily a great value deal because they were paying very high rates for these people who were quite green, but the quality of the people was phenomenal. So it sort of opened my eyes to what could be delivered by, really bright, smart people who were highly motivated, and which was the culture in the organisation. I mean, the hours that got worked, would probably shock people today coming into the workforce. But and then in the first business, we created a graduate scheme that again was very successful. So in a sense, I was leveraging off those two experiences to say, actually, there's something here that is can solve some of the problems that were around 10, 12 years ago when the business was created, in terms of lack of new talent in the market. Clearly the market's moved on now, and there are a number of businesses trying to do this. But at that point, that, as I say, it was a relatively novel concept, and you could go into new client meetings, and it wasn't a case of why are you different to the next guy. It was, I've not heard of this concept before, which is a nice place to be for anybody having a conversation, because you're not having a competitive dialogue. You're having a dialogue about your concept. So either they buy the concept and they buy it from you, and then they buy it from you because you're the only person they've heard it from, or you move on. But it's sometimes nicer to be selling a concept rather than be selling pure competition. It reminded me a little bit of a
So this is what I'm hearing about this.
Just reminded me a little bit of what I
so it's a huge shift, right, from that first business.
Yes, absolutely. So I was leveraging those prior experiences. Though I'm not going to take the entire credit, because it took a third party to actually point out that this was the real sweet spot of the knowledge and experience that I had. But I think that was to me a byproduct of recognizing that if you draw on other people's input at the right time and get other people to come and stimulate your thinking. Very often there's a great idea in there, you just don't know what it is, or you can't quite bring it out yourself because maybe your ideas are a little bit fixed or a little bit based on your own experiences. You just need someone else to tease that out, and that was the benefit of having a third party helping.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that there was a key moment or key process in that development phase of really going around and having sounding boards, or I'm wondering, were there specific questions that you were asking yourself or other people as you tried to hone in on this idea? Because that sounds like it was a key difference from the first time around where you kind of launched, where here it sounds like you spent a bit of time looking for that unique concept.
Yeah, and I think I'd encourage anybody. You're in a business for a long time if it's successful, and a lot of the opportunity and scale that you might be able to deliver comes from that initial thinking. Because once you're in play, then and you're speaking to clients, it's much harder to pivot. Though clearly, there is an opportunity, but you've got a website, you're going out to your network with a story. There's only so many relaunches you can go through. So I think it's really important to try and get that message right on day one as much as you can. I'm a big fan of the sort of lean startup theory of getting up the minimum viable product. Even though Grayce wasn't a tech business, the concept still applies, and you need to be able to pivot quickly to something else. But time spent up front is never wasted. I think it's a comfort zone to jump to action.
Yeah, so Peter, let's kind of zoom forward perhaps and look at the next phase. So that was really in the business concept definition phase, right? And that temptation, the learning there is to really think about the concept, right? To try to find that category where you can be differentiated. What did you then find in the kind of early years then? Like, what's your kind of biggest learning from perhaps doing it twice as you started to scale the original concept?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because we built a business that was profitable very quickly because it's a relatively simple model. You bring people in, you give them some training, you deploy them to client site, you drive utilization as in any professional services model, and relatively quickly you can move to a profit mode very quickly. And secondly, growth then comes because you're talking to more customers. And you get referrals if you're delivering a great service, and suddenly the business starts to grow quickly, which is what happened. I think if I have in that startup phase, I think the challenge any business faces, particularly where you're getting quite rapid growth without doing any, without necessarily being very proactive, is how fast do you want to put your foot on that accelerator? And if I have one perhaps tiny regret, is that we didn't put that foot down a little bit harder. So we didn't maybe we didn't move out of startup into scale up early enough. Because actually there was probably a window to accelerate, to bring in more sales capacity a little bit earlier, bring in a little bit more infrastructure. But it's a fine balance. It's a fine balance in any business. The scale up phase is often fraught with risk, and people lose what makes the business great if they're not careful. We'll maybe talk about scale up in a little while. But my own learning there was, you maybe just to think a little bit bigger at that early stage. That actually, if we really push this, we could grab even more market share than perhaps we did. Which we were the leading. We certainly grabbed that. We became the number one in our niche, but we could perhaps have accelerated that process and talked to more people, particularly as it wasn't necessarily competitive. It was about going in and talking to more people, because it was, as we said before, it was still a constant sell at that stage.
Yeah, I'm curious about this. Why do you think you weren't thinking bigger?
Because I think, ironically, in the first business, we probably accelerated too fast before we defined that. We had that clarity of concept before we had that clarity of vision, and that then created some problems, and perhaps it was a slight nervousness based on that previous experience not to overcommit, and to make sure that demand and all the rest of it was sustainable. And I think that perhaps that previous exuberance was slightly there was a slightly more cautious attitude to expansion based on that. It's not to say that the business wasn't doing well and expanding quickly. It was just a what if we type thought in the back of my mind. What if we found to? It's easier said than done to find great business development and salespeople, because that's still a challenge in new professional services business, and professional services always struggles, in my mind, with the sales process and the sales challenge, as opposed to certain other industries where perhaps it's a more neutral fit. So it's not to say that it would have been successful necessarily, but I think there was probably we could have taken slightly more risk than we did at that stage.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think one of the things I often do with my clients actually is remind them that they're thinking big, but they're probably not thinking big enough, because actually all the operational things tend to weigh on people, and even people who are thinking really big, when I actually push them, quite often they're kind of still within their comfort zone of like, I know how to do this, and I'm pretty confident we're going to hit our plan.
I can remember a conversation with a friend of mine who, and I, we talked a little bit about the business and said this is going better than I imagined, and you were almost in that imposter syndrome phase when actually probably what you needed at that stage was someone to tap you on the shoulder and go, this is actually, the reason you're doing well is because it's a great market. Push harder. I'm a keen golfer, and it always reminds me of the what people say about golf, that you play great for 5, 6, 7, 8 holes, and you can be under par even, and then there's a little voice in the back of your mind going, this won't last, and before you know it, you've hit a couple of bad shots, and you're back in your comfort zone. Well, that feels better. It was so stressful playing well, and having the courage to they say in golf, having the courage to go low, and shoot a low score takes a little bit of doing, because it's easier to revert to that position where you're not. It's hard and it's difficult, and
it's easy to reserve. And we all struggle with that, I think.
That's more comfortable to do really well. So there's some parallels there.
Yeah, for me, it's the heart of the impact multiplier method, as I guess I'd kind of call it, which is that, we have the strategy stuff and we have the kind of the inner stuff, and we both have to align. Like most people think I just need a bigger plan, a better plan, but normally it's not the better plan that is getting in the way. Sometimes there are things, normally we do need to up-level our thinking, but there's also the kind of am I really confident? Like, what happens if we do grow? Will it be okay? Will it be too costly? Will the business have a huge risk? Will we make the same mistakes as last time? It's all that stuff that comes up. And I think
yes, you get in your own ways, and I think that always comes in with a bootstrap business as well, because you're so invested in it that it's all your own capital, money, time, sweat, equity that's gone into it. That means that that your risk, your personal risk, feels multiplied on a number of levels. So maybe a VC business would be much more aggressive because they've got more. The capital is less emotionally attached to the business.
So absolutely. So I think that whole area, and I think the point about incubating before scaling, which is really get the concept right, then you can scale, right? But as you said, your first business, if you weren't quite locked in on the concept, scaling too early, you can just multiply your losses and multiply the stress, right? So let's kind of move on. So that's kind of this whole phase of, as you were kind of starting to get the traction, and perhaps you could have accelerated a bit further. So what was the next kind of phase of the journey that you would describe?
So I think then you're getting into the scale up phase, and you start to bring in more people. And I think one of the big successes of Grayce, I think, was the recruitment of that first generation of management that came into the business. And why was that successful? Not because on paper the people looked, immediately overqualified or super qualified, because they came from a variety of backgrounds. What was brilliant about the people we brought in was their attitude and mentality and the culture that they helped create. They loved the business, they loved what we were trying to do, they loved working with the people we had, and they loved the clients, and it created this enduring culture that lasts to this day. Many of those people are still in the business today and are key people. So I think that,
So these people that came in as you scaled up, or were these the original people? So let me clarify.
No, these are people that came in as we scaled up. So the first management team, I suppose, that the business had And that recruitment was incredibly successful. And recruiting. The biggest thing you can say about it is about all that is recruiting attitude and mindset, and people that truly care about what they do and want to be part of something that's doing something good. Obviously they need.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation. This is just a quick interlude to introduce you to two transformative programs that we run. The first is Rivendell, my exclusive group of top CEOs who are committed to transforming themselves, their businesses, and the world. It's an incredible peer group and a deep coaching experience that will push you to new heights, no matter how successful you've already been. The second is Impact Accelerator, a coaching program for executives who are ready to make a big leap forward in their own leadership. It's regularly described as life-changing, and no other program provides such personal, strategic clarity, a measurable shift in stakeholder perceptions, and a world-class leadership development environment. Find out about both of these programs at xquadrant.com/services. Now back to the conversation. So what do you think was the success? Just to drill on that part, Peter, for a second, because I think it's really key, right? The criteria for that management team. Because I heard there was also something there about honoring the past, or kind of like wanting to build on what's there. But yeah, like if you were to give obviously attitude and mindset, they're kind of, high level words. But if you had to have your checklist of 5, really key points that these people were successful because of these 3, 4, 5 very what about their attitude and mindset was it, would you say?
I think number one, they cared. They really cared. So if something was going wrong, they'd want to fix it. And they didn't shirk away from a difficult conversation with a customer or an analyst. So that care, was, they didn't stop thinking about the problems at 5:30. They were trying to solve them, sometimes to their own detriment, till well past 8, 9 o'clock at night. So I think that care is fundamental. I think secondly, their commitment to what we were trying to do, because fundamentally we were trying to give people who were struggling, certainly certainly 10 years ago, to get a role. Some very bright people are struggling to get a foothold in the labour market in a decent job, and they felt strongly about it, and they were keen to support people through that process and to start to make the most of their career. So there was a sense of purpose, I think, as well, that they were locked into. So find people that care about what they do and believe in what you're doing is really important. I think that. And I think thirdly, that they were able to, work with each other. There were no egos. It was a team, and there was trust between the people because the people shared similar values and attributes, and therefore felt, they felt a sense of camaraderie with each other because of those shared values and those shared attributes. If there'd been somebody in that team that didn't share those attributes or values, they stood out. But if there had been, they would have stood out like a sore thumb. Straight away they wouldn't have enjoyed working in a team because they wouldn't have. The lack of care, they didn't care, or they didn't believe in the purpose. It would have been incredibly visible and would have felt uncomfortable. Not because the people would have reacted to them negatively. It just wouldn't have felt comfortable for someone who didn't share those sort of values and attributes.
How did you do it? How did you find these leaders that worked so well and had the right attitude? Because, everyone probably wants these people, but do they always make the right recruitment choices in interviews? Not necessarily. So what was the secret sauce? How did you do that?
Yeah, I think it's about spending time. I think we've all, having been around business for quite a long time, I think you just get you get a gut feel for people. I think more than anything, you get a gut feel for what motivates people, and there's a checklist you can have of have they got certain skills, but I think that attitude just you can, as I say, I think it's easier sometimes to it's not necessarily an interview process, it's just talking to people and spending a bit of time with them before you jump into a decision, and having a bit of lunch with them, not moving outside a formal environment and just getting to know people. And it's interesting now when I read business literature. I recently read Walter Isaacson's biographies of Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, and it was incredible how much time they spent on recruitment. That was almost one of their primary jobs. They still saw, even when their businesses had grown enormously, recruitment was still at the top of their list of things to do because it was so important. And I think that's something sometimes in many businesses we think that we should delegate, when actually it's probably one of the last things we should be delegating, particularly in management and senior positions. If you understand the culture of an organisation as well as anybody, why are you passing on the responsibility too easily to recruit people who are going to help help create or maintain the culture in your organisation? You've got to keep that close and get people to meet as many people as possible.
I love this point about taking people out for lunch or just kind of getting to know them outside that formal process. I'm still a bit curious, were there kind of red flags or things that people would do that would kind of let you go, oh, hang on, this person's just out for themselves, or this person is doesn't really care about this company? Were there things that you picked up on?
I think people make. I think there's red flags like people making unrealistic salary demands straight away, or asking for when's the next promotion before people almost requesting things when they've not proved anything. I think the best people, they prove themselves first and then ask for something. So it always makes me nervous when but even when I hear a salesperson ask for a huge guaranteed basic, I think, well, why wouldn't you want more commission if you're a great salesperson? And I'm not talking directly about salespeople necessarily in this example, the people I'm talking about, but you'd like to see people who think, no, I've got to do something first. I've got to show my worth. I've got to demonstrate my value. So I always think people or people who are thinking about the next job before the one that they're actually applying for. Yes, I'll talk about the career opportunity and the career path, but let's focus on what it is I want you to do first, and that you'll enjoy this role. Is the person coming in to do the role that we're actually advertising for, or is this just a pillar or a pathway to something else? Because if you don't want to do the basic job that we're recruiting you for, then it's probably not a good fit, because you're not going to want to do it and you're not going to perform in that role. So again, little red flags that I think become obvious.
So we've been talking about this whole kind of scale up, getting this generation of management in, the fact that was the really key to success. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that phase, or is there another phase beyond that we want to do before we? I
think in terms of scale up, I think those would be the main points that I'd make. I think it is. I still think there's a bit about spending time on that proposition and refining it. I think again I would before you get into the real. Because once you start to scale, then the opportunity to really refine your proposition starts to slow down, because you're spread much more thinly. One of the things that people often associate with scaling for me is, we need more products. We need to diversify a little bit. We need to maybe our core market's not big enough, or I think that can sometimes be a siren song. What's made you successful is a certain service or product. Have you really connected to the full extent of the market that's out there? You're probably scratching the surface. So, why are you trying to diversify when you've got a huge space in the market to go after? Yes, it can make sense if it's very adjacent, but I personally would be focusing on that core product and making sure that we've got out there and really maximize what the core product can offer before we start thinking about diversification, because inevitably that dilutes what we are known for and what we're about. And I think the other risk of the scale up phase is, and I think everybody, does that. Everybody's aware of it, but everybody does it, is that we think, right, we need to start building our infrastructure, because it might be a little bit ramshackle because we've grown quickly. we start looking internally. We stop thinking about the customer. We stop focusing on the market. So how do we stop that happening? How do we stay focused, laser focused on what's really important? Because if you're scaling up as a business, you can guarantee that other people have seen this opportunity by now and are coming in to try and eat your lunch. So if you suddenly decided that I'm going to spend a lot of time looking internally, then they're out there talking to customers and they're positioning themselves in a niche space, saying, well, actually, we're the specialists here, not those guys. They started to diversify, and immediately, you've got the sort of advantage of scale now, but you might have the disadvantage of, you've become a little bit cumbersome and started to lose focus on what made you successful. So you've got to keep coming back to that core rest.
So how did you juggle that, Peter? Because I guess you might well need to improve systems and processes in that phase, right? So that you can take on new demand, and yet you still want to be focused on the market. So how did you navigate that tension?
I think obviously you've got to think about, you've got to try and, probably allocate somebody to focus on that internal aspect of the business. But I think, a CEO in particular needs to try and stay as externally focused as possible at that stage. It's just a nap. I mean, I've done it myself. You just become distracted by internal, and you've also got internal politics as you've got more senior people coming into the business who need time and attention, who've got their own needs. How do you make sure that those people don't start distracting you away from what the business is all about? I think if I was just reflecting back on how to do things better, two words come into my mind are, simplification. Try and keep things as really simple as you can. Again, I think there's some great stuff in the Elon Musk book again about how he just walked around the production line at Tesla, literally, asking for pieces of the production line to be removed because he identified it added no value to the process as far as he can see, and he was just constantly in simplification mode. And he's doing this at.
Yeah, he has a phrase called, which is, I think, that the biggest risk for smart people is optimizing things that should not exist.
Yes. Yeah.
Because there's always, and there's processes that handle every little possible exception, but most of those exceptions hardly come up. When they do, people can use their intelligence to actually work around it. You're not necessarily building a nuclear power plant.
Yeah. Just simplify. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So that simplification, I think, is massive. And I think for the business itself, I think, you've got to be really clear on priorities. Even Steve Jobs, I think, said that, even Apple can only have 3 priorities. So you've got to prioritize and make sure the organization knows what those priorities are. It's all right agreeing that in a small room with a couple of the leaders, but the organization needs to know these are the only priorities that count. Because, it's so easy to get distracted by stuff, and people just, become consumed by being incredibly busy, but stop delivering on what made the business successful.
Perfect. So we talked about this kind of scale up phase. Is there like another phase, perhaps, because obviously at some point you obviously exited as well yourself? I suspect there might be another chapter here.
I think consistent growth phase is the last phase that people are aiming for, where the growth, unless you're in some meteoric business that that lasts forever, where growth is exponential, inevitably you hit this consistent growth phase where the trajectory sort of tapers a little bit. You've addressed a large part of the market. There's still growth opportunities that maybe come through geographic expansion. You might start to look more at a little bit of smart diversification. You might start to look at acquisitions to consolidate the market. But at that stage, I think, again, it's about maintaining a pace that people can live with. So the organization has sort of probably been through this rapid growth. It's got into some kind of, it's become relatively stable and consistent. right, how do I keep the business moving forward? How do I stop complacency kicking in? How do I set realistic targets and so on and so forth? And I think that's in one sense, I think that's almost a different type of leader that the business might need at that point. Whether we've not really talked about this, but whether the founder is the best of an entrepreneurial type operation that's been through all these phases is the right person to run a consistent growth phase business. He's up for great, it's an open question, and they might not even be the right person to really deliver on the scale up. There might other, but I think you're going to need some help to enable you to make sure you don't fall into some of those traps yourself, because it's a
because founders tend to want to be innovating and creating new things, right? And the risk is they innovate on the thing that's starting to work.
Yeah, and then they start. Yeah, and are they operational leaders? Are they people that can deliver on a consistent 15% growth trajectory every year? Is that what they want to be doing? Is that the right business for them? Are they going to become? So again, we've got to be realistic about our own skill sets, I think, in these, and our own appetite in these phases of the business. It takes a particular type of individual to keep going through all these phases successfully. You've got to be incredibly skilled, and and some people get around by, obviously they've got VCs, they've got other people, funders and all the rest of it, and they're providing the management support and so on at certain phases. But in a bootstrap business, it's probably a little bit different, because you probably have less access to some of that. So I think that's about having good mentors, good support around you, asking you those questions. Is this, where do you need help, or are you the right person? Because nobody wants to be the person that.
And Peter, is this where you?
Yeah, this is where I would. This is where I probably stepped out partly through the scale up phase, because I asked, I asked myself, am I the right person to take things to the next level? Because I've not done that before. Is somebody else going to be able to do that better than me? And I think that's a question you've got to be honest with yourself as well, about where are my skills, what's my capability like, in that space. Is there somebody better than me to get a business forward? And that again
was that a hard conversation to have? Because I can imagine that could be, it's quite hard for us to look at the business you've created and start to say, should it still be me? Do I need to let go? Was that an easy thing for you? Was it emotional?
Yeah, and by this stage we have some private equity backers on board by this stage, and so it was an easier. It wasn't a difficult conversation necessarily to have with them. I like to think, well, I know they thought I'd done a very good job, and so on. But I think you're also, sometimes you think that perhaps the business needs to hear a fresh voice, perhaps, or it might need that a slightly more expansive mindset. You carried the business through that phase. I alluded before to the thinking big question. Maybe it needed someone to think bigger than I had. Maybe and switch out of that mode and then come in with a fresh mindset. So there's also a little bit of not wanting to, no one wants to be tapped on the shoulder and said, "Time's up." You've done a great job, but time's up. And there was no question of that. But you know yourself that you don't. Personally, for me, it's important to step in when I felt like the business was doing really well, rather than look like it was an exit driven by some kind of slowdown or underperformance.
Yeah, well, it's been a really fascinating conversation, Peter. I see the clock is probably up on us a little bit here, but it's been really fascinating to get a really pragmatic, the story, of the journey of the business overlaid with your previous experience, right, as to what you learned, and to kind of just distill those down, some of those key areas. The 3 phases, the importance of actually really focusing in on that concept before you scale, incubate before you scale, but then not being afraid to scale in that second phase, to really be clear on the executive team that you're bringing in and their characteristics, simplify, keep the priorities clear. And then in the growth phase, starting to perhaps think about, well, is there a different leader that might be temperamentally more suited to that, right? And again, kind of pushing more year ahead as well a little bit which has been, so it's been fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, not everyone wants to sit with a 20-30% target on the back on their head for the next 5 years, did they? Some people, it's great. For the entrepreneurs, probably doesn't probably think like that themselves. So yeah, I think it's about your own temperament and your own mentality.
Perfect. Well, hey, Peter, it's been great speaking with you about this, and look forward to watching Grayce as well as it continues to develop. If people want to get in touch with you or find out more about Grayce, where do they go to do that?
Just the website is www.grayce.uk. I'm on LinkedIn. It's my only social media presence. I'm sure you can find me. Not many Peter Busbys, there's a few, but there aren't that many. Perfect.
Okay, we'll put those into the show notes. Well, hey, Peter, thanks so much for this conversation. Really appreciated it. And well done with building such a fantastic business.
Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today.
You're welcome. Well, that's a wrap. If you received value from this conversation, please do leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. We'd deeply appreciate it. And if you'd like to check out the show notes from this episode, head to xquadrant.com/podcast, where you'll find all the details. Now, finally, when you're in top leadership, who supports and challenges you at a deep level to help you multiply your impact? Discover more about the different ways we can support you at xquadrant.com.